The alien hunters chuckled when she screamed, then realized she was calling something. The moon of Kareth 9 was not a friendly place. The trees were tall and black, with bark like cracked stone. The air smelled like iron and wet soil. Strange birds, if they could even be called birds, made low humming sounds from somewhere deep in the canopy. The sky above was a pale orange, always slightly dark, even during what passed for daytime. It was the kind of place that made most living things feel watched. Dr. Danny Yu did not feel watched. She felt at home. She had been on Kareth 9 for 8 months. 8 long, difficult, exhausting, and completely wonderful months. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life, and this moon was the richest place she had ever worked. Every week there was something new. A new insect, a new plant, a new behavior from one of the larger creatures that roamed the jungle floor. She had filled 14 field notebooks already and had started on a 15th. But today was not a good day for science. Today, her shuttle had gone down. It happened fast, a micro-debris strike to the fuel line. One moment she was flying low over the canopy, doing a routine aerial survey. The next, there was a loud bang, a smell of burning, and then the ground was coming up very quickly. She had managed to pull the nose up just enough to avoid a straight crash. The shuttle clipped the tops of 3 massive trees and skidded hard into a small clearing, tearing a long, ugly scar through the jungle floor before finally stopping against a mossy ridge. She had survived. Bruised ribs, a cut above her left eyebrow, and a right ankle that hurt when she put weight on it. But alive. The shuttle's comms were dead. The emergency beacon had been crushed when the front section crumpled. Her personal comm unit had flown out of her hands during the impact, and she could not find it in the wreckage. She had a pack with some food, a water filter, a field kit, and a short blade she used for collecting plant samples. That was it. She had started walking. She was maybe 6 kilometers from base camp. In normal conditions, that was nothing. In this jungle, after a crash with a hurt ankle, it was a full afternoon of slow and careful movement. She kept to paths she recognized, watching the ground for signs, listening to the sounds of the jungle around her. She was not afraid. She knew this place. She knew its sounds. She knew which animals to avoid, and which ones were simply curious. What she did not know was that she was being followed. The Vreth had arrived on Kareth 9 3 days ago in a mid-sized hunting vessel. They were large, reptilian creatures, standing close to 2.5 meters tall, with thick necks, flat wide heads, and scales that ran from dark green on their backs to pale yellow on their chests. Their eyes were small and yellow, and always looked slightly bored. They wore light body armor, and carried long-range pulse rifles, the expensive kind, custom-made for big-game hunting. Their leader was named Gorath. Gorath had been on 47 hunts across 19 different worlds. He had trophies on the walls of his ship from creatures that most hunters had never even seen in person. He was respected among his kind. He was known for being calm, efficient, and completely without mercy. Hunting was not a sport to him. It was a statement. Every kill said the same thing. I was stronger. I was smarter. You were not. He had come to Kareth 9 because of a rumor. Something large lived here. Something that had never been properly catalogued. His contact had called it a ghost of the jungle, a creature that left massive tracks and stripped full-grown trees of their bark, but had never been caught on camera. Gorath wanted it. He wanted the skull on his wall and the story in his mouth at every dinner party for the next decade. He had not expected to find a human. His scouts had picked up her trail early that afternoon. The broken branches at her height, the boot prints in the soft soil, the faint smell of human sweat and synthetic fabric. At first, he had ignored it. Humans were not interesting. They were small, soft, and completely unremarkable. There were billions of them scattered across dozens of colonies. They were traders, scientists, diplomats. They were not prey. They were barely even a nuisance. But then one of his crew suggested it might be fun. A human, alone, in a jungle this thick, with apparently no weapon and no way to call for help. It would be like catching a ground rodent. Almost embarrassing, but it would break up the boredom of waiting for the real prize. Gorath had shrugged and agreed. They tracked her for 2 hours before they moved in. She had stopped to rest near a wide, shallow stream. She was sitting on a flat rock, drinking filtered water from a small canteen, and writing something in a worn notebook. She looked completely calm. That irritated Gorath slightly. Prey should look nervous. Prey should look like it knew it was being watched. This one looked like she was on a walk through a park. He gave the signal, and his crew came out of the trees from 4 sides at once. Danny heard them before she saw them. Heavy footsteps. Too heavy for anything she knew. She was on her feet in an instant, turning, scanning. Then she saw the first one step out from the shadow of a black tree, and then 2 more, and then more after that. Large, armored, rifles up, yellow eyes watching her, without any expression at all. She knew what they were. She had read the species catalog. Vreth, hunters, from the outer belt systems. She did not run. Running would be pointless and embarrassing. She stood still and watched Gorath walk toward her, his steps slow and deliberate, like a creature that had never once been afraid of anything. He stopped 3 meters away and looked down at her. She looked up at him. He said something in Vreth that his crew found very funny. They laughed, a rough clicking sound, like stones being shaken in a metal box. He had called her a lost ground animal. Then he grabbed her by the collar of her field jacket and lifted her off the ground with one hand. Danny did not scream in fear. She did not beg. She did not kick and flail. She hung there for 2 seconds, completely still, and looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read. And then she screamed. It was not the sound of a frightened person. It was not sharp or desperate or broken. It was long and low and rhythmic, almost like a song. It rose and fell in a pattern. It rolled out across the stream and into the jungle and up into the black trees, and kept going, traveling far further than a human voice should reasonably carry. It lasted nearly 10 full seconds. Then she stopped. Gorath stared at her. His crew stared at each other. Then one of them said something, and they all laughed again, harder this time. One of them was nearly bent over. Gorath himself allowed a slow smile to cross his wide, flat face. He said something else, and his crew laughed again. He had told them the little human was calling for her gods. He dropped her back to the ground. She landed on her feet and looked up at him, still calm, still quiet, still wearing that expression that was almost impossible to name. It was not anger. It was not fear. If anything, it looked like patience. Gorath turned away and told his crew to bind her wrists and bring her along. She would make an amusing addition to the camp for the evening. Maybe one of the younger crew members would find her entertaining to study. He did not notice that the jungle around them had gone quiet. Every bird, every insect, every small sound that had filled the air moments before had stopped completely. The jungle was not quiet because it was afraid. It was quiet because it was listening. And somewhere in the dark, far back between the black trees, past the stream and the ridge and the deep shadow of the canopy, something that was very large had heard exactly what Danny said. And it had already begun to move. The alien hunters chuckled when she screamed. Then realized she was calling something. Park Tay was elbow-deep in a burned relay panel when he heard it. He stopped working immediately. His hands stayed still inside the open panel, fingers resting on a tangle of melted wires, but his whole body had gone quiet and alert. He turned his head to the side, the way people do when they are trying to hear something very faint from very far away. He heard it again. Low, long, rising and falling, rhythmic. He pulled his hands out of the relay panel, grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair, and walked out of the shuttle without saying a word to anyone. Oh, Rena looked up from the medical supply cabinet she had been restocking, and watched him go. She waited 1 second, then 2. Then she put down the box of bandages she was holding, stepped over the crate blocking the door, and followed him outside. Tay was standing at the edge of the camp clearing, facing south, completely still. Rena stepped up beside him and listened. She heard it on the third pulse, faint and almost lost under the usual sounds of the jungle, but unmistakable once you knew what to listen for. She had spent 8 months learning that sound. She had practiced it herself, badly in the early weeks, earning the patient correction of the one person on the team who had actually gotten it right. "That's Danny," Rena said. "Yes," Tay said. "She's far south, past the second ridge maybe. Maybe further." They looked at each other. They did not need to discuss what the signal meant. They had all learned the frequency patterns together, sitting around a small portable speaker, while Danny played recordings and explained what each variation meant. This particular pattern, long, low, 2 short rises at the end, was the one Danny had simply called the gathering call. It was not a distress signal exactly. It was more specific than that. It meant, "I am here. Come to me. Something is happening." "She's not alone," Rena said. "No," Tay agreed. Neither of them panicked. That was one of the things the 8 months had done to them. The jungle had a way of teaching patience to people who were willing to stay long enough to learn. In the early weeks, every strange sound had felt like a threat. Every shadow in the trees had felt dangerous. By month 3, they had all calmed down considerably. By month 6, Rena had started taking her morning coffee, sitting on a log at the edge of the tree line, just watching the jungle wake up. But calm was not the same as careless. He came out 2 minutes later, with a plasma cutter clipped to his belt, a compact medical kit slung over his shoulder for Rena, and 2 sets of night vision goggles in case the light dropped before they got back. He handed Rena the medical kit without being asked. She took it without comment. They moved south. The path to the second ridge was not a real path. It was more of a remembered route, a series of markers they had established over months of fieldwork. A broken branch twisted in a certain direction. A small stack of flat stones beside a root. A strip of orange survey tape tied high up on a tree, so high that nothing walking on the ground would disturb it. Danny had set most of the markers herself, always thinking ahead, always leaving trails back to safety. As they walked, Tay thought about the last time Danny had used a gathering call. It had been 4 months ago. She had been alone at the North Observation Post, when a juvenile Keth had wandered into the small clearing below. The Keth were the apex creatures of Kareth 9, enormous, armored, ancient. The survey team had first encountered them at the end of month 2, and for the first several weeks, every sighting had been terrifying simply because of how big they were. 9 meters tall, hide like layered rock, eyes the color of burning amber. They moved without sound for creatures their size, which made them somehow more alarming, not less. The juvenile had been hurt, a deep gash along its left side, probably from a fall. It had been pressing itself against a boulder and making a very low sound that Danny had later described as a pain sound. She had come down from the observation post with her field kit. Tay had found out about it afterward. He had been furious for about 6 minutes. Then Danny had shown him the recordings from her kit's small camera. The juvenile Keth standing very still while she cleaned and dressed the wound, its giant amber eye watching her with something that was hard to describe as anything other than attention. Real, focused, deliberate attention. After that, things had changed. It had not happened quickly. Nothing with the Keth happened quickly. But Danny had gone back to that clearing every morning for 3 weeks. She brought food, large cuts of the protein material they used for their own rations. Not ideal, but edible enough for the juvenile. She sat on the boulder and worked on her notes while the juvenile ate. She did not try to approach it again after the first time. She simply existed near it, calmly, day after day, until it stopped watching her quite so carefully, and started simply accepting that she was there. The other Keth had noticed. They always noticed. They were not a herd animal exactly, but they communicated. The adults had started appearing at the edges of the clearing, watching from a distance, silent and still as statues. Danny had not approached them. She had simply continued her routine, acknowledging them without making it a big moment. The way you might nod at a neighbor you pass every morning, without stopping to shake hands. By month 6 there was a large adult Keth that had taken to sleeping somewhere near the North Observation Post on a semi-regular basis. Rena had named it Boulderback. Danny had gently pointed out that naming them might cause the team to anthropomorphize them in ways that weren't scientifically useful. Rena had said she understood completely, and continued calling it Boulderback. The point was, the Keth knew them. Not all of them, not perfectly, but Danny especially. Danny who had learned their frequency patterns. Danny who had sat in their presence, quiet and patient and unthreatening, month after month. Danny who had pressed her hands against the juvenile's wound and made it better. If Danny had used the gathering call, the real one, the one they had learned from the Keth themselves, then she had not used it for Tay and Rena. She had used it for them. Tay thought about that as he climbed the second ridge, pulling himself up by a thick root and reaching back to give Rena a hand up behind him. They paused at the top. The jungle below the south side of the ridge was darker. The trees were denser here, older, and the canopy was so thick that almost no light came through. Rena pointed. Far below and to the left, very faint through the trees, the glow of a light source. Artificial, portable camp lights most likely. And if you listened carefully, under the sounds of the jungle, voices. Rough, clicking, mechanical-sounding voices. Not human. Tay and Rena exchanged a look. How many? Rena asked quietly. Tay listened. Several. Maybe more than 10. Rena looked at the plasma cutter on his belt, then at the medical kit over her own shoulder. She did not say what they were both thinking, because saying it out loud felt unnecessary. Neither of them were fighters. They were a field engineer and a medic. They had a plasma cutter and some bandages. But that was fine, because Danny had already made the call that mattered. Tay looked out at the dark jungle below, at the massive black trees standing silent in the orange half-light, and he noticed something. No birds, no insects, no sound at all except the distant voices from the alien camp. He had been on Kareth 9 long enough to know what that silence meant. The jungle wasn't empty. It was paying attention. She already called them, he said quietly. Rena nodded once. Then we just need to be close enough to help if she needs it. They started down the ridge, moving quietly, staying low. Somewhere below and to the east, something enormous shifted its weight, and the ground, very faintly, trembled. The alien hunters chuckled when she screamed, then realized she was calling something. The Vreth camp was comfortable, as temporary camps went. They had set up 4 portable shelters around a central clearing, each one large enough for 3 crew members. There were tall camp lights on poles that bathed the area in a cold white glow, making the surrounding jungle look even darker by contrast. A portable cooler sat near the largest shelter, stocked with drinks and rations. Weapons were racked neatly along a frame near the entrance to Gorath's shelter. Everything was organized, clean, efficient. These were not amateurs. They had done this many times on many worlds, and they moved through the process of making camp the same way experienced travelers pack a bag, without thought, without waste. Danny sat near the cooler, with her wrists bound in front of her, with a thick plastic tie. They had taken her pack but left her field clothes. One of the younger crew members had gone through the pack and pulled out her notebooks with some curiosity, flipping through the pages and showing the others the diagrams and sketches inside, before losing interest and tossing it aside. Her field knife had been pocketed by Gorath personally. Her water canteen had been emptied and kicked under a shelf. She watched all of this with the same quiet expression she had worn since the stream. Gorath was sitting in a folding chair near the center of the camp, reviewing something on a handheld screen. He was looking at the Keth tracks his scouts had brought back that afternoon. Massive three-toed prints in the soft soil, the kind that sank several centimeters deep, even in firm ground. He was calculating size, weight, likely territory range. He had that look on his face that hunters get when they are thinking about a trophy. He had not thought about Danny at all for the past hour. She was not interesting. She had made a strange noise, she had been caught, and now she was sitting quietly in the corner, being unimportant. Two of the crew had made a few more jokes at her expense during dinner, and then moved on to other conversations. She was background, furniture. That was fine with Danny. She was not thinking about escape. She was thinking about timing. She was thinking about how far sound traveled through the Kareth 9 canopy at night, and how the density of the older trees on the south ridge affected acoustic range, and whether the wind direction this evening was favorable or not. She was doing in her head the same quiet calculations she did when she was planning a field observation. Where, when, how long to wait. She had sent the call once. She did not need to send it again. It was the younger crew member who noticed first. He was standing at the edge of the camplight, near the trees, finishing a drink, when he saw it. He did not say anything for a moment, because he was not sure what he was seeing. He thought at first it was a trick of the light, a shadow in the wrong place, or a reflection off a piece of bark. Then the shadow moved, and he realized it was not a shadow at all. It was a head, massive, wide, dark-scaled, and absolutely still. A head the size of a small vehicle, sitting at the tree line, barely visible, only the faint amber glow of two enormous eyes giving it away. He sensed something. His voice came out smaller than he intended. The crew turned. The first Keth stepped out of the tree line. It did so slowly, without hurry, without any particular display of aggression. It simply moved forward until it was fully in the light, and then stopped. It stood 9 meters tall. Its body was built wide and low, with 4 thick legs that ended in broad clawed feet. The hide across its back and sides was layered in thick dark plates, like overlapping stones. Its head was carried low on a short, heavy neck, and its amber eyes moved across the camp slowly, taking everything in. It made no sound. It did not roar or growl or posture. It simply stood there and looked. Then the second one stepped out, 30 meters to the left. Then the third, further right. Then the fourth, directly behind the camp. All 4 of them still, all 4 of them silent, all 4 of them watching. The Vreth crew had gone completely rigid. No one spoke, no one moved. The casual ease of a few seconds ago, the drinks, the jokes, the bored efficiency, had evaporated entirely. In its place was something very old and very biological, the part of the brain that does not reason, the part that simply says, "This is bigger than you, and you should not move." Gorath stood up slowly from his chair, eyes fixed on the nearest Keth. He was experienced. He had faced large predators before. He had faced things with more teeth and more aggression than this. He told himself that. He reminded himself of his 47 successful hunts and the trophies on his wall. and the fact that he was holding a weapon right now that could punch a hole through 4 meters of solid rock. But there was something about the silence that was wrong. A predator closes the distance. A predator shows aggression. A predator wants you to feel the pressure of the approach. That was how it worked on every world he had ever hunted. Size and sound and forward movement. That was the language of a predator claiming space. These creatures were not doing any of that. They were just standing there, like they were waiting. Gorath's voice came out steady, because he had spent years making sure his voice always came out steady. He told his crew to raise their rifles. Slowly, they obeyed, moving with the controlled calm of trained hunters, even though 2 of them were clearly shaking. 12 rifles came up. 12 fingers rested near triggers. It was a good tactical position. From the entrance of the camp, you had clean lines of sight to all 4 creatures. At this range, with this equipment, they could do serious damage. The Keth did not react. Not one of them flinched or shifted or looked at the weapons. Their amber eyes stayed on the camp, steady and unhurried. One of the crew said, very quietly, that maybe they should leave. Gorath did not answer him, because at that moment the nearest Keth lowered its head toward the ground, all 9 meters of itself, bending slowly forward, and made a sound. It was low, long. It rose and fell in a pattern. It rolled out across the camp and into the jungle, and seemed to hang in the air after it ended, the way a musical note sometimes does. Gorath knew that sound. He had heard it exactly once before, about 2 hours ago, coming from the throat of the small human woman sitting on a rock beside a stream. The sound was the same. Not similar, not like, exactly the same, note for note, pattern for pattern, as what Danny had screamed into the air when he lifted her by the collar. He turned and looked at her. She was already looking at him. She had not moved. She was still sitting with her wrists bound, still wearing the same expression she had worn all evening. But now, seeing Gorath look at her, she tilted her head very slightly to one side. Patient and deliberate. It was the kind of look a person gives when they have been waiting for someone to understand something, and that someone has finally started to catch up. One of the crew said something that had the sound of a question. What does it mean? Why is it making that sound? Why aren't they attacking? Gorath did not answer. He was too busy understanding, with the slow and terrible clarity of a very experienced person encountering something completely outside their experience, that this was not a coincidence. The creatures had not wandered into camp by chance. They had not been disturbed and come to investigate. They had not been attracted by food or light or sound in any ordinary sense. They had come because the small human woman had called them. She had stood in the air 2 hours ago in his grip, and she had called these things. And they had come. He looked at Danny again. She met his eyes, calm and steady, and said nothing. Outside the circle of camp light, the jungle was absolutely silent. Not one bird, not one insect. The 4 enormous creatures stood without moving, without sound, without any expression that his experience could read or predict. It was not the silence of a place about to explode into violence. It was the silence of a place that was simply, completely, entirely waiting for her. Gorath became aware that his hand on his rifle was very tight. He made himself loosen it. 1 finger at a time. The nearest Ket's amber eyes moved from the crew and settled, slowly, on Danny. And Danny looked back at it the way you look at something you know very well. Like an old friend who has just arrived. The alien hunters chuckled when she screamed, then realized she was calling something. Nobody moved for a long time. The camp was a small island of white light in a very dark jungle. The 4 Keth stood at its edges like walls, their amber eyes glowing softly in the dark. The 12 Wreath crew members stood with their rifles raised and their bodies still, not because they had been told to hold position, but because nobody could decide what the right move was. And in the absence of a clear right move, the body defaults to stillness. Gorath was thinking. He was doing what he did best, which was assess, count, calculate. He had 12 crew, all armed, all trained. He had a clear field of fire in every direction. The Keth were large, but they were outside the main light radius. A coordinated volley could do damage. His rifles could punch through the hide of most apex predators. He did not know the biology of the Keth well enough to know if they were a good shot or not. But at this range, he stopped. He looked at the Keth again, all 4 of them, standing without sound, without movement, without any sign of aggression. He looked at the way they were positioned, not rushing forward, not spreading out into an attack formation, not doing any of the things a predator does when it is about to strike. They were simply there, present, surrounding the camp in a loose circle as if they were keeping something in, rather than planning to come in themselves. He had hunted apex predators on 11 different worlds. He knew their body language. He knew the stillness before a charge, and the particular quality of attention in a predator that has decided on a target. It looked nothing like this. This looked like, he searched for the right word, like attendance, like a bodyguard standing outside a door. Protection. He turned and looked at the human woman again. She had not moved. She was sitting with bound wrists, watching him with that infuriating, patient expression. And he realized, with some irritation, that she had been waiting for exactly this moment. The moment when he stopped trying to figure out the creatures and started trying to figure out her. Gorath pulled a chair in front of her and sat down. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and looked at her directly. He had a translation device clipped behind his ear, standard equipment on any world where contact with other species was possible. He could understand her clearly. He could be understood just as clearly. There had been no reason to use it earlier because there had been nothing to discuss. Now there was. "How did you tame them?" he asked. Danny looked to him for a moment. "I didn't," she said. Gorath waited. Her voice was even and plain, like someone explaining something they had explained before. "They're not animals in the way you're thinking. They're not pets. They're not controlled. If you tried to control one, it would probably find you very confusing and eventually just stop paying attention to you." "Then why are they here?" "Because I called them," she said, as if this were obvious. "And they chose to come." Gorath's jaw moved slightly. "Why would they choose to come for you?" Danny was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't have an answer, because she was deciding how much of the answer was actually useful to give him. 8 months ago," she said, "my team landed on this moon. There were 4 of us. Our job was to survey the ecology, document species, establish safety protocols for future research stations." She paused. "The Keth showed up at the end of our 2nd month. We had heard them before that. You could hear them moving at night, sometimes, if you were paying attention. They're not loud, but they're heavy, and the ground carries sound here." "You were afraid of them," Gorath said. "Yes," she said simply. "Of course we were. They're 9 meters tall and covered in natural plating that's harder than most armor composite. The first time one came close to camp and we saw it properly in daylight, 2 of us did not sleep that night." She glanced at the nearest Keth, its amber eyes steady. "But we didn't run, and we didn't shoot. Why not?" "Because we were scientists," she said, "and because running and shooting felt like the wrong choice. And when 2 things both feel wrong, you wait." She let that sit for a moment. "So we waited," she continued. "We kept doing our work. We stayed in the same areas. We kept our movements predictable. We didn't push toward them, and we didn't avoid them. We let them watch us. They watched a lot in the beginning. You can't always see them, but you can tell when they're watching. The birds go quiet, the way they're going quiet right now." She tilted her head slightly. We learned that first. Gorath said nothing. After about a month of them watching and us working, I started going to one of the clearings where they came regularly. Just me. No equipment except a field kit. I sat down and worked on my notes. I did that every morning for 3 weeks. I didn't look for them. I didn't call to them. I just existed in a space they used, calmly, and I left when I was done, and came back the next morning. That's it? One of the crew members had drifted closer, listening despite himself. His rifle was still up, but his attention had shifted. That's the start of it, Danny said. She glanced at the crew member briefly, then back at Gorath. Then one of the juveniles got hurt. That took about 40 minutes, and it took every bit of calm I had because it was enormous, and I was right next to it, and it could have ended me in about 1 second. She paused, but it didn't, and after that, things changed. Slowly, very slowly. There's no moment where it flipped over. There's no day where I can say, this is the day they trusted me. It was just months of being present and being consistent and not doing anything threatening, and eventually the distance between us got shorter, without either side trying to make it shorter. Gorath looked at her for a long time. You have no weapons, he said. I have a field knife, she said. You took it. A field knife, he repeated. He almost laughed. You came to this moon, a place with creatures like these, with a field knife. And notebooks, she added. There was a silence. One of his crew said quietly that they should just leave. Gorath heard him. He was still thinking. He was looking at the Keth, at the way they held their positions, not restless, not impatient, just present. And he was thinking about how he had spent 47 hunts across 19 worlds, building a reputation on the idea that he was the most capable thing in any given environment. He had believed that completely. He had never had a real reason not to. He was now, for the first time in his career, standing inside a perimeter that someone else controlled, in an environment that someone else understood, with weapons that he was no longer entirely certain would help him. The human woman had no armor. She had no weapon worth the name. She was smaller than his youngest crew member by a significant margin. She had come to this moon alone. Well, nearly alone, with notebooks and patience, and had spent 8 months in the dark jungle, making friends with the most dangerous things on the planet. And now, those friends were here. He looked at her wrists, still bound. He looked at the nearest Keth, whose amber eyes had not moved from Danny in the last 10 minutes. He thought about the sound the Keth had made, the exact sound Danny had made, played back to him from a throat the size of a cargo drum. He thought about what it meant, that they had learned to speak to each other, that she had learned their language, and they had in some way learned hers, or at least the part of hers that mattered, and that this had not been forced or trained or engineered, but simply grown over time the way most real things grow, slowly, without announcement, and much stronger than it looked. He thought about his 47 hunts and his trophies. He thought about the Keth tracks he had been studying on his screen an hour ago, those massive 3-toed prints pressed deep into the soil, and how he had been calculating size and weight and trophy value with the bored confidence of someone who had never been surprised. He was surprised now. He reached forward and cut the plastic tie on Danny's wrists with the small blade from his belt. She lowered her hands and rubbed her wrists once, without drama, and looked at him. Outside the light, the 4 Keth remained exactly where they were. The plastic tie fell to the ground between them. Danny rubbed her wrists one more time, and then let her hands rest in her lap. She did not stand up immediately. She did not make any sudden move. She simply sat, still and calm, and looked at Gorath the way she looked at everything on this moon, with full attention, without hurry. Gorath leaned back in his chair. Behind him, his crew had slowly, without being ordered to, lowered their rifles. Not all the way. Most of them still held the weapons ready, arms tired, fingers close. But the full raised position had become too heavy to hold indefinitely, and the minutes were adding up. The Keth had not moved. They were not going to move. Some part of the crew's bodies had started to accept that, and acceptance had let the arms come down a few degrees. "Tell me something," Gorath said. His voice was flat and careful. "If I had not cut those ties, if I had decided to simply leave with you as a passenger, what would they have done?" Danny considered the question honestly. "I don't know exactly," she said. "I've never tested it." "Guess." She looked at the nearest Keth, the big one, the one that had been the first to step out of the tree line. She had seen this one before. She recognized the particular shape of the plating above its left eye, slightly raised from an old injury. She had been watching this one for nearly 5 months. She had sat in the same clearing as this one more times than she could count. "They don't think the way you think," she said slowly. "They're not calculating an outcome. They're not planning. They operate on something more like presence and response. They came because I called them, and they're here because I'm still here. And they're waiting because I haven't done anything that tells them to act." She paused. "If that changed, their response would change. That's the most honest answer I can give you." Gorath nodded once. He seemed to find that answer more acceptable than a polished one. He stood up and turned to his crew. He spoke to them in breath, his voice carrying the tone of a decision already made. He told them to begin breaking camp. He told them there was no hunt here tonight. He told them they would leave at first light, or earlier, if preparations finished sooner. One of the crew started to argue, a broad-shouldered one near the weapons rack, one of the older members, who had the look of someone who found retreat genuinely offensive. He said something sharp. He gestured at the Keth. He said something else. Gorath looked at him without expression. He said something very quiet. The crew member went to start breaking camp. Gorath turned back to Danny. "You can stay in the camp until we are packed and gone. Then it is yours, such as it is." He glanced at her pack, which had been thrown under a shelf. "Your things are there." "I know," Danny said. He looked at her for one more moment. His face was difficult to read, flat and controlled the way it always was. But there was something in it that had not been there before. Not respect exactly, not yet. Something closer to the look of a person who has just revised a calculation they thought was finished. He walked away toward his shelter. Danny stood up. She picked up her pack and checked it briefly. Her notebooks were there, a little roughed up but intact. She tucked the one that had been thrown aside back into the front pocket and zipped it. She looked for her canteen, found it empty under the shelf, and clipped it to her pack to fill later. Then she walked to the edge of the camplight, to the nearest Keth. She had to walk past 2 of the Vreth crew to do it. They stepped aside without being asked. She did not look at them. She stopped just at the border of the white light, where the dark began, and looked up. The Keth was very close. From 2 meters away, it was so large that it filled most of her field of vision. She could see the individual plates of its hide, dark brown at the edges, almost black at the center, each one slightly textured with small ridges that ran in parallel lines. She could see the slow rise and fall of its breathing, deep and rhythmic. She could smell it, a heavy, earthy smell, like old stone and rain. Its amber eyes looked down at her. Danny lifted her hand, her right hand, open, palm facing out, and held it steady, short, low, 2 notes in a sequence. It was not the gathering call. It was something else. Something the team had taken weeks to identify properly. Tay had called it the all clear, which was close enough. It meant, "I am safe, you can go." The Keth looked at her for a long moment. Then it made a sound back, so deep and low that Danny felt it more in her chest than heard it with her ears. 1 note, held, then released. Then it raised its massive head, turned and walked back into the trees. No hurry, no drama. It simply went, the way it had come, disappearing into the jungle shadow in a way that seemed impossible for something its size. Within seconds, there was no sound. She looked to the left. The second Keth was already gone. To the right, the third was turning already half into the shadow. It was simply there, and then it was not. The jungle stayed quiet for another few seconds. Then, very softly, the night sounds came back. First the insects. Then, further off, the birds. The ordinary rhythms of Kareth 9 returning like water filling a space that had been briefly emptied. Tay's voice came from behind her, low and close. "Nice timing," he said. She turned. He and Rena had come up behind the camp from the southern approach. She could see where they had been crouching behind a wide root at the tree line. Plasma cutter still at Tay's hip. Medical kit still on Rena's shoulder. They had been there for a while, she guessed. Long enough to see most of it. Rena was looking at the spot where the last Keth had vanished. "I counted 4, she said. 4, Danny confirmed. "Boulderback was there?" Rena asked. "Second from the left," Danny said. Rena looked quietly satisfied. Behind them, the Vreth camp was being dismantled with impressive speed. Shelters folded, lights packed, weapons stowed. The crew moved with the focused, efficient energy of people who have decided on something and are committed to it entirely. Gorath stood to one side and watched, not helping, just present, the way a person in charge sometimes is. He looked across the camp and met Danny's eyes one more time. She held his gaze. She did not smile, and she did not harden her expression. She simply looked at him, and he looked at her, and then he turned back to supervising his crew. The three of them, Danny, Tay, and Rena, sat down together at the edge of the tree line and waited. Tay opened the small side pocket of his jacket and pulled out a squashed but intact energy bar, and broke it into 3 equal pieces without being asked. Rena accepted hers and ate it in small, deliberate bites, while watching the dismantling process with the professional interest of someone who has never seen Vreth equipment up close before. Danny ate her piece and looked up at the pale orange sky between the branches. The Vreth were gone inside 40 minutes. The ship, parked in a larger clearing about a kilometer northwest, lifted off quietly, the way ships do when they are trying not to draw attention. No engines at full burn. A careful, steady climb. The running lights blinked twice, and then they were above the canopy, and then they were gone. The clearing where the camp had been was empty, except for the scars of the shelter stakes in the soil, and one forgotten folding chair that had been left behind, still sitting upright in the middle of the space. Tay looked at it. "Do we keep that?" "It's a good chair," Rena said. They started back toward base camp. Tay carried the chair. It was too heavy and awkward for the distance, and he complained about it exactly once, which Rena told him was one complaint more than was useful. And after that, he carried it in silence. Danny walked ahead, picking the path, moving through the dark jungle the way she always did, reading the ground and the trees, tracking the sounds, noting things in the part of her brain that was always collecting. She had lost a day of fieldwork to the crash and the aftermath, but the ankle was already feeling better, and she could think of 3 observations worth recording just from the walk back. At one point she stopped and put her hand on a tree trunk and made the short 2-note sound again, not loud, barely more than a murmur. From somewhere deep in the dark, far enough away to be felt rather than heard, something answered. 1 note, low, held. She walked on. Tay and Rena followed without asking what it was. They already knew. They had been on Kareth 9 for 8 months. They had learned many things in that time. The most important one was this. Of all the tools humanity had ever carried to new and dangerous places, weapons, armor, engineering, tactics, medicine, the one that worked most reliably on the most worlds in the most impossible situations was something that had no weight and took up no space. Patience, presence, the willingness to show up, day after day, and simply be the kind of thing that the universe did not need to be afraid of. It did not make good stories the way battles did. It did not have the clean drama of a fight won or a problem solved in a moment of cleverness. It was slow and quiet, and it looked from the outside like nothing much at all. But it had turned 4 of the most dangerous creatures on Kareth 9 into something that answered when you called. And tonight, it had sent 12 armed hunters back to their ship without a single shot fired. Danny thought that was a pretty good result for a Tuesday. Above them, through the canopy, the stars were very bright. Below them, the jungle breathed and clicked and hummed, as alive and as indifferent as it had been before any of them arrived, and would be long after they were gone. And somewhere in the dark, heavy and silent and present, something enormous walked a parallel path through the trees, keeping pace, not following, just there.